Hi everyone, my name's Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good as Gold Australia. And this morning, once again, I'm joined by my brother Brian,
Thank you,
partner
Darryl.
at As Good as Gold. And today we interview Gerald Celente, the one and only Gerald Celente, of course, the top trends forecaster in the world. Gerald is the director of the Trends Research Institute and the publisher of the Trends Journal, where you read about history before it happens. Good morning, Gerald.
Morning, Gerald.
Good evening. Nice to see you.
Gerald, look, a lot of water flown under the bridge since we spoke last. It hasn't been all that long, but there is a lot that's happened.
There's a lot happening.
So I'm really looking forward to this discussion this morning. I look at the world at the moment, and it's a pretty challenging place. The three T's: terror, tension, torment. Add lies and deceit to that, and I think you've pretty much got the world as it is at the moment. What I would like to do to start with, Gerald, is just get your impressions of where the property market's heading, the residential market in particular. We've had the RBA over here, and this is fairly typical worldwide, but we've had the RBA over here after telling us that they weren't going to introduce or increase interest rates until 2024. We've had 10 successive interest rate increases. So we've had another 0.25% overnight. We're at 3.6% cash rate at the moment. What does this really mean? Look, for the average Australian, or it may not be quite average, but for many Australians who have got $750,000 mortgage, it's added $1,500 a month to their mortgage commitment, which is seriously significant. And we have just found out overnight, I mean, this didn't come as a surprise to me, but we just found out overnight that the RBA governor, Philip Lowe, of course, is not on the same interest rate with his home mortgage.
Oh, no kidding.
No, about half that which the rest of Australia experiences. So, but we're all in this together, of course, right? So here we go. How difficult, is it for Australians? It's very difficult. And you add all of the other expenses, of course, the increase in cost of living, whether it be food, energy, transport, it's massive. So pretty simply, Gerald, they can't afford it. They cannot afford it. Something has to break. We've been told by the master, that is our governor, Philip Lowe, that they may is the word, pause interest rates, just depending upon the data that comes through over the next month or so. But I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, go back to Japan. And Australia are breaking in the 90s when they had the debacle in the in real estate. Just want to point out a couple of things, and then I'll want your impressions on this, of course, Gerald. Residential land value to GDP ratio now is higher than it was in Japan in 1989, when at the start of that bubble, when we saw property prices drop around 70%. During Japan's property bubble, the ratio of residential land value to GDP hit a record of more than 330%. We've just beaten that record. Also, during the period before the global financial crisis in the US, and of course, you'd be very familiar with this, property prices rose by the equivalent of 60% of GDP. Here in Australia, Gerald, we've experienced an increase of 100% of GDP in the last 3 years. So heaven knows where it's going from here. Japan experienced this major boom, as we know, 1980s, saw stocks, properties explode in value, skyrocketing asset prices, blamed on, guess what? Easy credit, rampant speculation, coupled with a lax central bank. Similarities here, of course, and in the US.
Right.
Land and real estate rose by nearly 170% between 1985 and 1990, while stock prices doubled between 1987 and 1990. The bubble burst. or began to burst at the end of 1989, when the Bank of Japan started to sharply raise interest rates in an attempt to curb runaway prices. Once again, serious similarities. Asset prices subsequently crashed, leading to a period of economic stagnation from 91 through to 2001, the lost decade. Now, I know there's a lot of information there, but none of it's good, and we can relate so well to this here now in Australia, and I'm sure in the US. Where do you think the property market's going? Do you think we'll emulate Japan? Gerald, what are your thoughts?
What's your inflation rate in Australia?
No, we're told it's 7%, Gerald, but as we would all know, it's probably closer to 17.
So what you're really looking at is you're still looking at negative interest rates in reality.
Yes.
Put inflation into it. So let's go back to about the easy credit that you talked about with Japan. Let's go back to the COVID war. Let's go back to all those freaks, those power-hungry little jerks.
Yep.
From one after another, locking down the entire country. Stay in your house. Close down your business. Don't go outside. And what did they do? They bring interest rates down to, in the United States, 0. Over in the EU, they still kept them negative since 2012, as inflation's going up. They created a bubble with all of this cheap money. The markets, the housing market, the equity markets, the economies should have crashed. Should have crashed in Europe. Should have crashed in Australia. Should have crashed in the United States. They pumped in unprecedented amounts of cheap money between the central banks lowering interest rates the way they did and the governments flooding in all of this cheap dough.
Yep.
They created a bubble of unprecedented size in modern history. We've seen nothing like this. So what's going to happen? Well, here in the States, the housing prices estimate went up 40% in 2 years. Wait a minute, 40% in 2 years? While businesses are going out of business?
Yep.
Well, yeah. How could this happen? All right, so is there going to be a correction? Yes, there's going to be a correction. But think of how high it went. Are you going to see a 40% decline? We don't believe so. But there are the wild cards. And that's why, when people say, I always make it clear, no, nobody could predict the future. We do trend forecasts. There are too many wild cards, whether they're made by nature or humans. So let's look at the two wild cards being played now. And we got to talk about inflation and what's going to wear things. The Ukraine war, the crazy wild card. Who would have thought of this would have happened a year and a half ago? Wasn't on the calendar. Oh, 3 things. And now it's over there in Australia, United States, those lousy Chinese, we got to do everything we can to stop them. Okay. You're going to fight the Chinese? You're going to bring that up now? You're going to, how dare they take Taiwan? What the hell do I care? This has been going on with the Ming Dynasty and them for how many centuries? Oh, no, we have to stop it. We have to bring freedom and democracy. Oh, yeah, you Australians. Yeah, wasn't Gallipoli great? Did a terrific job. What are you doing over there? Get back home. No. We're maniacs and we're going around the world. And now what's going on in the Middle East? Not my words, but from the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the extreme right-wing government of Netanyahu in Israel. And now they're talking about, will they attack Iran? Okay, attack Iran. Now I'm mentioning all this because of the wild cards. And the wildest of the wild cards is more inflation. And what the inflation number is going to blow up is if there is a military conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. They have protests going on now in Israel every week. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets because of the judicial reform they want to do, which basically means there is no judicial anything. The politicians are in full control. So the people are taking to the streets. One of my sayings is, when all else fails, they take you to war.
Yeah.
If there's a military conflict, you're going to see oil prices, Brent crude, go to above $130 a barrel, US dollars.
Mm-hmm.
That will crash the economies, and it will crash equity markets, housing markets. It will bring everything down big time. So we don't know where that's going to go. The same thing with the Ukraine war. If this thing continues to escalate, energy prices are going to keep going up. So will there be a housing? Yes, the housing's definitely going to go down. But the bigger one in the States is the commercial office sector. We have an occupancy rate, according to Castle, that's Kastle, 50.4% office occupancy rate. Wait a minute. Half the people are going back to work than before the COVID war? Yeah, that's right. How about all the businesses that depended on commuters going out of business? A third of the dry cleaners are dried up, gone. Now look at the hotels that used to have business travel. Business travel has not come back. It's not going to come back. And the office sector, building sector was already overbuilt before all this happened. Now let's go back to you talking about raising interest rates. Oh, now you got to pay more on those variable rate loans while you have less tenants.
Yeah.
You are going to see a crash and it's an office building bust that the mainstream media is now just barely talking about, that we warned about 3 years ago. That's the one to keep your eye on big. In the States, yes, we're going to see a decline here. New mortgage applications in America just hit a 28-year low.
Yeah.
Now you're going to raise interest rates. Mortgage rates are going to go up. That's going to keep going down. But here's the difference. When we had the bust that happened with the panic of 2008, we had the subprime mortgages. The banks, the gangsters. Hey, you don't have a job? You're deep in debt? Don't worry about it. Here, sign over here and you can buy a house. That didn't happen this time. So yes, you're going to see a sell-off, but we don't see a bust in the States yet. Now let's go back to Australia. You're not going to raise interest rates? Oh, is the United States is raising interest rates? If the United States, if the Federal Reserve raises interest rates 50 basis points, when they meet again, I think it's March 23rd, you're going to see March economic madness. They can't deal with it. Now, the dollar goes up, and the dollar's only going up because the other currencies are so weak. Now the dollar goes up because interest rates go up. Your currency goes down. So they're going to raise interest rates to keep the currency from collapsing. That's the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
So a lot of this is going to have to do with what the Federal Reserve does in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's a pretty nasty scene, isn't it? I mean, and what I've noticed also, Gerald, over here in Australia, once again, governments, and you mentioned the printing press. I mean, they only have a couple of tools, and they've maxed out. But governments never ever talk about inflation or them being responsible for inflation, which leads to this problem in the first place. It's always, and you've said it, it's pandemics, wars. It's their predecessors. They left us with this big debt. We didn't expect that. What would you expect us to do under the circumstances? You know, what we've noted at the moment also, we've just, and I've sort of thought this was going to be happening for a long time. But the government has now decided that they're going to start imposing taxes on our super funds. Anyone who has worked really hard in their life and somehow managed to accumulate a $3 million in their super has now found that they're going to be taxed at a rate of 30 cents in the dollar versus 15. And, the interesting thing about all of this, Gerald, is the inference was, it's just going to be the rich that are going to be affected. Yeah. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. Look at a 20-year-old person today. When they retire, that $3 million is going to be worth nothing, but they're all going to be taxed at 30%. I mean, these are the introductions now that are starting to take place as we've got a bankrupt government. I just expect to see more of this happening. I just don't know how far it can go, but you're the trends forecaster, you'd know.
As I said, when all else fails, they take you to war.
War.
They get your minds right off it. Look what happened here. It's what followed the Great Depression.
Yeah.
World War II.
Yeah.
What followed the dot-com bust? The war on terror. Our magazine, the Trends Journal, in October 1999, when it used to be a quarterly, now it's a weekly, we had forecast dot-com bust by the second quarter of 2000. And it did. Busted in March of 2000. The NASDAQ was down like, some 60-something% before 9/11. We're going into a steep recession. 9/11 happens. You got a little clown of a nobody boy, a daddy's boy born on third base, George W. Bush, a little jerk of nothing. We're going to get that guy Osama bin Laden dead or alive. 88% of the people swallowed the crap coming out of that clown's mouth. But forgot all about the dot-com bust. And then they created the next bubble with the housing market and the derivative scam. They're going to do the same thing now. When you go to war, it brings profits up. People get their minds off it. And I believe that's what they're doing. They keep selling war, and it gets the people's minds off of the problems that are existing. And what the hell is Australia doing anywhere else? You're way the hell over there. What are you going on? Like the United States. Yeah. Oh, again, I'm Vietnam War era age. Every day I used to wake up and they're going to get me. They're going to get me. They lied about it. The Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. Robert McNamara, an arrogant, low-life piece of scum. But to make the point, they lied about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction. Never had them. Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. And number two, what the hell is the United States doing in the Gulf of Tonkin? What if the Vietnamese were in the Gulf of Mexico? You'd like that? Why, how dare they be there? We can only go to any country we want and kill anybody we want. We're America. That's how easy the people swallow the crap.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the whole system and central banks. We had a clown, arrogant jerk made rotten hell. And you're talking about taxes. Woodrow Wilson gave us World War I, gave us the Federal Reserve, and gave us federal income tax. We didn't have them before that. Yeah. We need those tax. We're a Yankee Doodle dandy, a Yankee Doodle do or die. Do or die? Oh, yeah, we got to go over there and save the world. And the people march off. They're doing the same thing now. Here, this is the cover of the Trends Journal. Again, when it used to be a quarterly. See how happy that guy is? This is spring of 2014. It's the United States coup of the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine. In detail, as it's happening. Oh, that article was written by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan. People have no idea of anything. All they do is swallow the headline crap. We are in for the worst socioeconomic and geopolitical disaster in modern history.
Well, that's interesting. I said to a number of people before this interview, I said, you wait till you hear Gerald Celente. He spells it out how it is. Gerald, you're doing exactly that. And I like it. I like people who seek to speak the truth. And there's a rare politician that does that these days.
It's hard to listen to, but people need to know. This is the point. They can't afford to keep going around with their heads buried in the sand.
Yeah.
Washington is driving the world to the final war. Ukraine presented the perfect opportunity for Washington to advance its hegemonic agenda. In a speech at the National Press Club in December, that's December 2013, Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland boasted that Washington had invested $5 billion in non-governmental organizations in Ukraine to, quote, teach democracy.
Oh, yeah.
$5 billion that they didn't have. Otherwise, if they had it, they'd be in surplus. But they are not in surplus and never have been in surplus. We'll move on, Gerald. But we're going to be continuing on the same line. But I'm going to give you, Darryl and I do this all the time. I'll give you a little story and then an explanation of how you feel. I've called this one, we have presently a fire sale in gold and silver. Now, I talk about gold and silver. We are bullion dealers and we love gold and silver simply because for money. We don't love it as a religious thing. We just like it as money. But there's a fire sale on, right? In 2008, the global financial crisis hit us and the Federal Reserve grew its balance sheet and expanded their money supply from 850 billion to 4.5 trillion. And that is an increase of 500%. In 2020, due to the pandemic, the Fed expanded again and money supply increased from 4 trillion to 9 trillion, which is greater than 100% over the period of 2 years. In each case, stocks, bonds, real estate surged. Also, fine art and collectibles. In both time periods, we have a massive money printing, which correlates to the massive inflation. Now, let's have a look at the gold price, which in Roman law, that is, still exists today, Darryl, is legal and sound money. The global financial crisis period to now, gold has increased 180%. Not 500, but 180%. In the pandemic years, the period till now, gold has increased 7%. The Fed's balance sheet has increased by 10 times or 1,000%. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a fire sale on gold and silver at the moment. Gerald, what is your view and how much should we buy?
Well, I can't tell you how much to buy or should you buy it. I'm not allowed to give financial advice, and I have to have again, the motto of the Trends Journal is think for yourself. We give the trends analysis and the trend forecasts. Let's go back to what you were saying about the Federal Reserve and their balance sheet. You missed something as well. Between 2007 and 2010, late 2007 and 2010, they pumped in $29 trillion. $29 trillion into the banking system. That's according to Bard College, the Levy Institute at Bard College. So it's not my number. Mm-hmm. Then we look at the debt level in the United States. I mentioned that little clown boy of nothing, an arrogant little moron, George W. Bush. Again, they keep taking you to war. The budget deficit was $5.7 trillion. Today, $31.6 trillion since 2001. How are you going to pay this off? Oh, I forgot. Interest rates are going up. Now you got to pay more on your loan. This thing has been so artificially inflated. So going back to gold and silver. By the way, my first buy of gold, I forget, it was either 1977 or 78, was $167.50 an ounce. Or 187. I think it was 187.
Cheap.
Yeah. And that's how I became a trend forecaster. When you talk about government, I was on the other side. I was the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate at 26 years old. I used to run major political campaigns in Westchester County, the richest county in America. I was the chief government affairs specialist for the chemical industry back in the 1970s. At 28 years old, I'm staying at the Willard Hotel and putting my meetings on at the Hay Adams, the top places, and killing environmental legislation at the height of the environmental movement. So I was on the other side, and I started to grow up. And that's when I became a trend forecaster. And I quit my job in 1979 when the Iranian crisis was heating up before. And everybody was taught to hate Iran. Let's hate Iran like we hate Russia. We don't know any of the facts, but we'll buy the headlines. People had no idea the United States overthrow the democratically elected government of Mossadegh in 1953, brought to you by another arrogant piece of scum who they quote as a hero, Winston Churchill. We want that Iranian oil, the MI6 and the CIA. Kermit Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt's grandson, leading the charge in the CIA, overthrowing the democratically elected government of Mossadegh in 53, bringing in the Shah and the Savak, the secret police, that made the SS look good. So when the revolution happened, I'm looking at the facts, and that's what we do. We look at the facts. We don't take sides on things. I'm saying to you why I started investing in gold. I started playing the futures market. I had a $5,000 bet that I brought up to almost $750,000 playing gold and oil futures. As everybody was learning to hate Iran, I said, what are going to be the socioeconomic and geopolitical implications? So let's go back. So I realized what would happen, and it did. Gold and oil prices skyrocketed. I quit my job and I began the Trends Research Institute in 1980. Now let's go back to gold. Gold prices now should be well over $2,000 an ounce. And why would you not want to buy gold when not too long ago in 2022, the central banks had a record year buying gold?
Yeah.
They're buying the gold because they know how bad it is. And now there's going to be a pull away from the dollar. The dollar is going to crash when they start lowering interest rates. And I'm forecasting they're going to start lowering interest rates before the 2024 presidential reality show. They do it all the time to artificially prop up the economy for the president that's in power. Because all you have to do, if you have a brain bigger than a pea, you can see who's running the government. The other arrogant clown that used to be the Fed head, Janet Yellen, before following Bernanke and before Powell. What was her job? She was the head of the Federal Reserve. Yeah, that's right. What's her job now? You mean she's the U.S. Treasury Secretary? What am I, 6 years old? I can't see this. So you see the deal? Washington and the Fed are one gang. It's a crime syndicate. So the dollar is going to crash when interest rates, they start lowering interest rates. You've got a debt level, I told you, of $31.5 trillion. This country's going down big time. I was in D.C. on February 19th. We had a big rally. It was called Rage Against the War Machine. And I told you, I spent a lot of time in D.C. Whole different Washington, D.C. from the time I was there. At the traffic circles, you like all those homeless tents? Oh, you go down the streets for rent, for lease, for lease, for rent, for rent, for rent, for rent. The whole society is in collapse mode. When interest rates go down, the dollar is going to go down. You're seeing India trying to stop trading in dollars. China, Russia, Brazil, one country after another, they've had enough of the United States hegemony in terms of foreign policy and financial policy. Again, the Bretton Woods Agreement is a long time over. That was after World War II. It's a different world. You look at the numbers. Just as I say, one of my sayings is the 20th century was the American century. The 21st century is going to be the Chinese century. The reason? The business of America is war. The business of China is business. When you look at America's defense budget, the military budget and the intelligence budget, and calling it intelligence is an oxymoron, it's over $1 trillion. We have 332 million people in this country and $1 trillion defense budget. China, 1.4 billion people and a $224 billion defense budget. Again, you look at the Trends Journal magazine this week, not our data, the data that we collect and show the proof of. China's moving way ahead of all the countries in the world on the high tech, and nobody's coming close. And that's the future. So that's where we're going. So going back to gold and silver, to me, it is the number one and number two safe haven asset. And again, you don't have to believe me. You could believe the central banks. And you also mentioned the money that the Federal Reserve pumped in. You forgot to mention, in 2019, there was a market crisis happening. The repo markets. The gamblers on Wall Street needed more cheap money and they couldn't get it. The Federal Reserve dumped in $7 trillion from September 2019 to January 2020.
Yeah, it's just a lot of paper money, and yet gold and silver. I mean, I get frustrated sometimes because I see prices of goods going up, all the energy prices going up, raw materials going up, and silver is still $20 an ounce, US.
And then silver. Here's the deal with silver. Silver, it's everything. You know, computers, cell phones, everything has silver in it. Yeah. All of this, the solar panels, silver. What happens when your phone, your computer, you dump it, it goes into the dump. It's not like gold where you keep saving.
Yeah.
So it's being used more and there's less of it. The prices should be way up. But let's look at the reality. This is a cover. Our artist, Anthony Fried, is a genius. This goes back to 2012. Could you see that cover?
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. So we're coming up to Easter time pretty soon. And just as the Prince of Peace drove the money changers out of the temple back then, it's the same thing now. I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
JP Morgan Chase, convicted of 5 felonies. 5 felonies convicted of. Oh, what was one of them? Let's go back to 2019, not ancient history. Rigging the precious metals market.
Yep.
Convicted of it. Hey, give him a slap on the wrist. Jamie Dimon only makes $35 million a year. You know, fine him a couple on it. Give him a fine and then go, shut up. Go on. Let them do what they want. They're rigging it. They're rigging it because, here, we all know, we talk about $3 million, like when I was a kid, a millionaire was a millionaire. $3 million isn't the dough it used to be. It's not big money anymore.
No, it's chump change.
Yeah. And when you got these billionaires, was Buffett worth 112 billion or something? Bezos, Musk, all these guys. Oh, by the way, the billionaires, when they start with the COVID war, the rich got richer and everybody else got poorer. The billionaires of the world in 2 years got $27 trillion richer. They own everything.
Yeah.
They own the world. So going back, driving the money changers out of the temple. And then 3 days later, he's on the cross, by the way.
Yes.
You don't screw with the bankers, That's what's going on. The game is totally rigged. I mentioned to you who the Treasury Secretary is, that how dare you bring in the former Fed head to be our Treasury Secretary? Look at the gang running the show. George Carlin, the great, it wasn't a comedian, he was more than that. He was a great line. It's one big club and you ain't in it. And the big club is the military-industrial complex, the banks, the bandits, the drug dealers that people call Big Pharma, and Big Tech. They control the show. They control the show. And look how low it's all gone for everybody. 64% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. You go to LA, you want to see homeless, San Francisco. Before I left my heart in San Francisco, you bet you did. Well, I can't believe what the place looks like. One after another. All the middle classes, America's middle class has shrunk 11% since 1970. This was the land of opportunity. Now, get a job at Walmart, get a job at Costco, get a job at Hannaford, get a job when I was a young guy, they had hardware stores, stationery stores, drug stores, grocery stores, all gone. The chains own everything. Chains, the chains. And all we are plantation workers chained to the chains. And again, I just gave you the data. Oh, I forgot one. When the arrogant bankster bandits brought those interest rates down and the government's pumped in all that money, that cheap dough, merger and acquisition activity in 2021 hit an all-time high. The bigs got bigger. The bigs got bigger. They could give a flying crap about the people. And again, I was there. I was with, the governor, the majority leader. I was right there. It was the worst job, by the way, I ever had when I worked for the Senate. The worst job I ever had. And I quit. None of my friends could believe I'm quitting. I said, I'm not going to do this stuff. I'm a Napolitano born in the Bronx, right after the war, born to be free. My mother, may her soul rest in peace, something would happen. And she'd say to me, before I understood what the word meant, she'd say to me, I hate cowards.
Yeah.
And that's all these little politicians are. They're little low-life cowards. You know how they get up to the top? They bend over and suck it up. That's the way they get up there. They're gutless little clowns. You call these guys out man to man. They don't know whether to piss or shit. They're little nobodies. Look at them. Look at them. How could anybody take orders from these little nothings? The politicians are the same little shitheads I hated in high school and college that wanted to be class president. That's all it is. They have destroyed life on earth. They could care less about anybody but their own ego. That's all they want. And power. And the bureaucrats, these are the imbeciles that can't get a job in the real world. The dumbest bastards and bitches around. Oh, I forgot. You forgot your health ministers over there in Australia. I remember them great. And what was that other clown you had? Gladys been jerking off. What was her name? Got caught screwing a guy.
Perigiclian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're so correct. You're so correct.
I can't argue with any of that.
No. This is right. All the facts are out there. You know, we agree with all those
Look
facts.
at these clowns.
Yeah.
Look at them.
Yeah.
Look at them. Look what they look like.
I know. And
Look
none
at
of
that
them.
little jerk he got there, guy. His whole life he's been sucking off the public tit.
We do agree that, I mean, the politicians in Australia, if they leave politics without their great retirement plans, they usually get a cushy job, but a cushy job usually is in the finance department, you know, and that's all they know.
No. And none of these guys have ever run businesses. They've never employed 10 people, and yet they're running the biggest business in the country, you know, so they are totally out of their depth. Hence, the reason that most countries are bankrupt in real terms.
Oh, yes, they are.
To me, you want the precious of the most precious metals.
Yeah.
And again, in the magazine, this week's I think was 176 pages. No ads. We have no ads in the magazine. We're totally independent. We say what we say because we believe in what we're saying.
Yeah.
We're political atheists. We don't take part in any political crap, and we don't sell anything. It's only, and by the way, the magazine's the grand total like $2.86 a week. It's nothing. We're giving everything we can to give the people the best we can, in-depth socioeconomic and geopolitical trend analysis and trend forecasts that nobody does. They don't do that. So when I talk about gold and silver, it's not like, you know, you guys are in the business and hey, you know, it has nothing to do with it.
No.
Gerald, we could go on for.
Look.
We had a lot more questions to ask, but I know we're out of time. And we really appreciate the time that you've committed, Gerald, as is always the case. I'd like to finish by thanking Gerald, of course, for his input today, which has been absolutely fantastic. And I've got I keep going back to a gentleman by the name of Charlie Jones, of course, Charlie Tremendous Jones. Don't know if you've ever heard of him, Gerald, but he was a motivational speaker, an American. We connected with him many years ago and got to know him really well. And he had many comments that he would make and throwaway lines, but one in particular, he said, look, in 10 years' time, you're going to be in exactly the same position you're in right now, apart from two things: people you meet and the books you read. And he is ever so spot on with that statement. I mean, we've developed by meeting people like Gerald.
Yeah.
And, you know, everybody else, everyone that's watching this interview right now can take advantage. Look, I stress this, you know, and it's overlooked so often, it's not taken advantage of. But every single person that's watching this interview now should take advantage of Gerald's ability to convey this message. Gerald, if people want to know more about the Trends Journal, what exactly do they do?
Just go to trendsjournal.com. And again, you know, I've never worked harder in my life. And you talked about what that gentleman said about, you know, the people you meet and keep reading books. I read. I don't have time to read books. I read about 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I read all the news. I go to all over the world. I want to get the news. I want to get the news, and then we analyze it. And what happens is I underline the salient points of the articles, and I send them to the writers, and we put all notes around them. Look about this. What is he saying about that? Find out more about this. You know, so every article is almost like investigative journalism. So we again. You can't stop learning. I'm not the same guy I was when I was a young guy. And that's another thing. When I was like 18 years old, reading dinner, and my father, may rest in peace, reading dinner, he looks at me, he said, you know, son, they say that youth is wasted on the young. They take a couple more bites, and he looked at me, he said, they were talking about you. So it's a learning process.
Absolutely.
And you can't stop learning. You can't stop learning. If you do stop learning, check out, you know.
That's right.
Yeah.
Keep your mouth shut. Don't think about anything. Don't give your comments. You don't know what's going on. You can't stop learning. And so by me having this magazine, I've been doing this now for 43 years. It keeps me learning. It keeps me on top of the current events forming future trends.
Yeah.
Yeah, very wise comments.
Very wise and a great idea.
Well, I hope everybody takes advantage of what Gerald has to offer. Thank you so much again, Gerald. Really appreciate your time, your input. It's always fantastic connecting with you, and we look forward to doing so again in the very near future. We'd also like to thank our viewers and subscribers for connecting with us and supporting the channel as well as they do. And so until next time, Gerald, let's all stay well, stay focused. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.